Collision, written and performed by Postman. October 1st. The time is 10:03 and 44 seconds, 3/100ths of a second, 4 milliseconds, a.m. Two drivers of two vehicles are frozen in the absolute last moment of their lives. The front bumpers of their two cars squish and morph into each other in a way that is both dangerously fast and agonizingly slow. They are living in the split second of impact, because this is all the time that is left. Since this is all the time that is left, this time is all the time that will ever be again. For them, this is forever. Seconds turn into days, turn into years, turn into eons. There are an infinite number of moments between seconds, and this is one of them. A cigarette floats in midair just a millimeter below the vaporous maw of the male driver, who, until this point, had been a breathing and functioning human being, but in mere minutes will be an unrecognizable mess on the street. A few shiny beads of sweat hover over the stringy wisps of his poorly combed remains of what someone with a charitable sense of fashion and a loose command of the English language might have called a haircut. The sunken eyes and sagging jowls suggest premature aging brought on by decades of stress, an addiction to fast food, and daily chain smoking. The slightly minty vapor of his breath hints that he prefers menthols, and the salty, buttery smell mixed in with it suggests he ate a ham biscuit for breakfast. A few crumbs remain on his light button blue shirt, which will never be wiped off again. The man sits in a small red sedan that's roughly a decade old. The hood of the red sedan has prematurely become part of the hood of another vehicle, a dark blue coupe. The engine, chassis, transmission, and other internal organs of the vehicles bend and twist into each other like a chrome tumbleweed being pushed together with invisible hands. Further up the hood of the blue vehicle, the texture of the hood becomes smoother to a point, then meets the windshield. For now, in this instant, the glass of the windshield is smooth like a frost-covered lake in an undiscovered polar climate. Seconds from now, it will be in several hundred locations. The driver of the blue coupe looks beyond the windshield through her oversized sunglasses. The sunglasses are enormous, not cartoonishly large, but large enough to be almost insect-like. Her hair is curly and blonde, shoulder length, reflecting the low light peeking between the clouds and the overcast sky overhead. The impact makes her hair stand behind her like a jellyfish encased in concrete. She is dressed sharply but conservatively. A black faux leather overcoat and comfortable sneakers that may have enough grip to go hiking with. She looks like she's either in her late 20s or early 30s. The age when you realize you need to figure out what you're doing with your life, but too early to actually realize that life is just going to do whatever it wants to do to you, and controlling it is like attempting to verbally command the ocean. Behind the large sunglasses, her pale blue eyes are fixed on the driver of the other vehicle. Her brow is narrowed, her bloodshot eyes are locked on his. One word will be permanently etched in her brain for this eternal moment like an epitaph on the gravestone. Vengeance. This is not an accident. This is mutually assured destruction. Everything that happened in the last few months has led up to this moment. This is the final punctuation mark of her life story, and it's an exclamation point. "I'm sorry," the oncologist told her. After some procrastination and reluctance, she went to the doctor for a cough that had been bothering her for a few weeks. It was a non-productive cough, but it wasn't the worst cough she ever had in her life. It was more of an annoyance than a symptom of a serious illness. She suspected it was simple asthma since she was a chronic sufferer and hoped a few meds would clear it up. Then one referral became another referral. The meds and the doctors prescribed only seemed to make her sicker until finally X-rays revealed a tumor in her chest. It was small and it was in the early stages. "You're lucky though," the oncologist continued. "Since we caught it early, we can remove it with surgery, but you'll probably have to stay home for a few months to recover from it. You'll have to take it easy." She thought of what the word lucky meant. She imagined the word lucky in her mind, picked it up with her fingers, turned it around, inspected the edges, ran her fingers across it, and felt the texture. She imagined what it felt like to hold it in her hand, how much it weighed. It was about the weight of a brick and the size of a stapler. To her, lucky was finding $20 in your coat pocket that you forgot you put there. Lucky meant going to the store and finding her favorite snack on sale for half price. Lucky, to her, was the complete opposite of finding out that you were going to die from lung cancer unless you went in for invasive surgery. She finished inspecting the word, clasped it in the invisible hands in her mind, and put it back in her pocket. Lucky. Lucky. It was the only word on her mind as she left the doctor's office. It repeated in her brain like a phone ringing from the other room, but you're asleep in bed and you're too tired to answer it, so you lie there listening to the phone ringing and ringing and ringing. Her brain pulsed. Her windshield begins to crack, as does his. Tiny pinprick-like dots form like injection sites of a syringe. Then lines emerge outward from them like jagged spider webs. His expression remains the same. The driver of the red sedan knew this was coming. He too had a plan, though it wasn't revenge. It was resignation. He wanted relief. He walked too many miles. It wasn't fun anymore, or even bearable, and he was ready to cash in his chips, to go to that big cattle ranch in the sky. There was a time when he still had hope that things could turn around for him, but as he grew and saw how the world truly turned out to be, with evil routinely prospering and the virtuous being fed to them like cattle, his perception narrowed to a mindset that only allowed for him to do one thing: do his job and shut up. Go to work, sit at your desk, earn just enough to stay alive, then go home. Maybe buy a tiny trinket from time to time to distract yourself from the fact that you have no free will. Recently, just several months ago, he was faced with a difficult choice at work, one that haunted him daily for the rest of his short life. It was the first time in years that he had to actually question his own integrity, his own humanity even. He arranged for a meeting with a young woman who needed surgery to remove a tumor in her lung. The tumor was caught early on, so it was still operable and her life could be saved. But he had to deny this life-saving surgery because she was using an out-of-network insurance company. This was the only hospital in several hundred miles that offered the surgery she needed, but he had to deny her because the insurance simply would not pay for it. She also couldn't travel to any of the other hospitals because they were already booked up and she would not live long enough for the surgery. She would have to pay out of pocket, and that kind of surgery was prohibitively expensive. There was no possible way she would ever afford it without becoming homeless. It was the most painful thing he ever had to do. He would never forget the look she gave him when he had to break the news to her. It was subtle, but it looked like her soul left her body right then and there. Almost imperceptibly, she ceased to be. It wasn't his decision, of course, he was just doing his job. There shouldn't be any guilt, he only followed his orders, but he was still the one to metaphorically pull the trigger. She looked at him for a while, studying his face, reading his expression, the contours of the lines, and then left after thanking him for the meeting. After she quietly closed the door, he continued to sit behind his desk and buried his head in his hands. That night, he smoked an entire carton of cigarettes. Both windshields fold in on each other, glass shards edging towards both drivers while their heads lean forward as if bowing in prayer. In the backseat of both cars, simultaneously, a presence could be felt. Giving it a name would be to personify it. It is something that is alive and also at the end of life. It is death, capital D. Death is not a skeleton holding a scythe, it's more of a feeling. It moves too quickly to be seen by human eyes or any of our visual equipment. It can only be seen if time is frozen completely still. It is a shade, a slight change in temperature, a small wind. When this moment ends, it will take these two. For now, it is there, because it was sent there. It's where it needs to be and nowhere else. She knew it wasn't his fault. She wasn't a fool. She knew the entire American healthcare system was ironically one of the most communist practices in existence. The company tells you where you can go, what services you're allowed to get, and forces you to pay what they tell you you must pay. The only choices you have are death or destitution. In this case, the choice was made for her. The rich get richer while the poor are fed to them, and we all just accept it, she thinks, because we've been beaten into thinking that nothing we do will ever make a difference. We're all just fuel for an unstoppable machine that mows us down like wheat in the combine. Without surgery, she had about 3 good months left in her, before it becomes too painful just to exist. She didn't want to go out like that. No. An idea crept into her mind during that meeting with the man who denied her surgery. It won't change anything. but it will make her life have an impact. At least she can go out on her own terms. She already knew the name of the man she had the meeting with, Marvin Laster. With only that information, she learned his home address, the route he took to work, the time he always left home to reach the office, where he stopped for breakfast, and even how often he went to the barber. She was an invisible shadow. She made stalking Marvin her full-time job. She ignored numerous phone calls from her actual employer until they eventually stopped calling altogether. Letter after letter arrived in her mailbox telling her she was past due on the rent, electricity, and other bills. One by one, they were shut off. Soon, she was without power or even water. It didn't matter. None of that mattered except Marvin. Marvin will pay. Marvin must pay. In the meantime, she drank from public faucets and ate only the bare minimum to keep from starving to death before the cancer got her. In a way, this new purpose made her feel more alive than she ever felt. It was like her life had meaning, a real purpose. The last and final eviction notice said she had until October 1st to either pay the rent or clear out of her apartment. It was an easy choice. She steers her car directly into Marvin's car. When the young woman left his office after being denied surgery, Marvin looked at her file. Lauren Morgan was her name. He wished there was anything he could have done to help her. He felt like a murderer. This young woman had so much potential to do great things with her life, and with a swipe of his pen, he killed her. What for? Was he feeling survivor's guilt? He thought about what was left to do. He considered the possibilities. Could he have just approved her for surgery anyway? Was there any way he could have added her to his own insurance and let her have the surgery that way? No. His hands were tied. He was just as helpless as she was. The only difference was that he was in a better position. That's it. That's just the way the ball bounces. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Some people just have shit-ass luck, and there's nothing you can do about it. You may ask yourself, why me? But then you have to also ask yourself, why not me? It's the chaotic nature of life. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Like the old proverb says, man plans, God laughs. For the next few months, Marvin went to work as usual at his desk job and tried to put Lauren out of his mind, but she was always there, watching him out of the corner of his eye. Of course she wasn't physically there, just a manifestation of his survivor's guilt, judging his every action. He tried to bury himself in his work and be a good little obedient office drone just long enough to make it to the end of the workday. Then when he went home to his family, he retired into his study and drank until he couldn't remember anything about what happened during the day. One night, his wife asked him if anything was wrong, and all he could do was drunkenly sob and tell her he was sorry. When she asked what he was sorry for, all he could do was shake his head and continue drinking. She was afraid the environment was becoming unhealthy for their child, Randall, and stayed with them at her mom's house. She wished there was something she could do to help Marvin with whatever he was going through. But she had to put her child first and just pray that Marvin sought the help he needed. Those prayers, unfortunately, will fall on deaf ears. Marvin sobered up just enough to continue going to work and coming home to drink himself into erasing his memory. The next few months blended together like one long day, events all happening at the same time like a collage that he experienced in a dreamlike fugue state. He couldn't go on like this. He had to repent for being complacent in the assisted murder of that young woman. Whether he was responsible or not, he was still an accomplice. He didn't want to live another day being a tool in a system that murders people for profit. He steers his car directly into a blue coupe. With horror, he recognizes the driver. The cars collide in a twisted, burning heap of metal. The crash is heard for miles in all directions. It is so loud that it shakes house windows. Car alarms go off. Parts are scattered in all directions on the two-lane street. Airbags are deployed, but the force of impact was too great. Both spines are severed, and the drivers are killed instantly. Shards of glass are strewn hundreds of feet down the road into the next street. Pools of motor oil and blood leak from the impact site, creating a slippery hazard. The road will be closed for the next day while the crash site is cleaned up. Then business will return as usual. This horrific crash will make the headlines. Locals will talk about it for a day or two. But it'll soon be forgotten, and it will be as if this never happened. A footnote in history. A few people will ask if anyone heard about that crash the other day, and a few people will complain about the road being closed. The only impact on anyone's life will be that Randall will grow up without a father, but Marvin's wife will be sick with grief for the rest of her life. She will never be able to love another man again, but will give Randall the best life she can provide for him. The end.